Hello, welcome to Go Beyond Betty. It is getting to be that fall season, and so I'm going to start making soups. I love soup, but I tend to not really want it in the summer. I want more salads, but now we're finally hitting our soup season. So I'm going to start with my favorite soup that I make. I call it our sick soup. So anytime we're sick or somebody is sick, I always have this on hand in the freezer. You know, I love to freeze things. It's just very healthy, delicious, rich in nutrients as well as in flavors. So soup is a layering process. You want to start with your base and whatever is going to take the longest to cook. For me, the longest to cook in this soup is our celery, carrots, and onions. So this, I wouldn't put tomatoes in at this point because we know tomatoes cook very quickly. So we need to do things in a certain order so that everything cooks perfectly and at their own temperatures and times. So I'm going to get started with a couple onions. You can use any kind of onion. These are just your standard yellow onions. I like to do these in just a nice fine dice. It doesn't have to be super small, but I want to keep all my vegetables about the same size. I'm going to use my biggest pan, good old Big Bertha. Any kind of heavy bottom pot will do. I'm going to put a generous amount of olive oil in the bottom. I always like to get the onions going first, and then on top I'll get the carrots and the celery. So we have carrots, celery, and onions going. We're ready for our next layer. So I'm gonna get about maybe half a bowl of garlic, which ends up being maybe 5 or 6 normal size cloves. And I've shown you this before. I give them a good whack on top. That way I can easily peel the skins off. And you just want just a fine dice on these. The next thing, I love chorizo. So this is one that you will not find in the refrigerator section. This is down the aisle. So go down whatever aisle you have a lot of Goya products, and they're always just kind of hidden somewhere in the little nook. So they're harder sausages. It's not the chorizo in the refrigerator section that is real crumbly like ground beef. These are hard sausages like a salami. So I'm going to open these up, and they do have a casing on them. I removed the casing, and then there's always 2 sausages in there, and I'm going to cut them in half, and then so they'll be the half moon size for the soup. They're always going to be attached. So detach them, and then I think it's easier often to just cut them in half. You probably could leave the casing on. I just don't like it, so I just peel it off. But you could, it's totally safe to eat. I'm just not a fan. So from this state, just little half moon size pieces. And then we're going to throw that in as soon as we have all of them ready. Round 1 is pretty soft. Adding in our garlic and chorizo. We'll let that render down. Next part that we're going to layer in there is some kale. So I love Dinosaur Kale. You don't have to remove this spine, but if you like to, I tend to just pinch it and then grab the bottom part and pull through, and then that can go in your garbage bowl, and then you don't have any of the rib. Since it's soup, it really is going to soften up. And let me just show you how I keep it in here. So I washed it all the other day. It had gotten kind of dry from just sitting in the fridge. So I just soaked it in this whole thing, and it stiffens right back up. So if it gets wilty, don't just assume it's dead and damaged. It just needs the ends cut like flowers. And soak it in water for an hour or so, and then they're good as new. So I'm going to put a bunch of kale in there. And then you can use a can of tomatoes, but I have these and they need to get used. So I'm just going to half these little tomatoes and throw those in as well, just so there's some tomato in the soup. So layer 3 getting chopped up now. If you think those shreds are too big, you can always go back through. Just do one more cut through it, and then you should end up with a pretty nice sized piece for a spoon. lot of kale. You might think this shrinks down a lot, but it's not like spinach. It's not going to disintegrate. It's still a pretty hardy vegetable, so it doesn't shrink down too much. Look how lovely these are. Oh yeah. So you can tell that things are definitely getting soft. It's time for we're gonna put in some beans and then we're gonna put in the broth. We're ready for our final layer. So I put in a couple bay leaves. You could use fresh or dry. A couple cans of garbanzo beans. I made mine from dry, just the way I normally do them. 41 minutes in the pressure cooker. And then a ton of chicken broth. So I made this the other night. Not fancy, but it's really delicious. So the best chicken broth is always the homemade one. So fill it all the way, as much as you can get in. And we're not worrying about putting salt or any other seasonings for now. We're just trying to cook our soup. So this should go pretty much to the top. I love that I'm seeing the orange oil of the chorizo already floating to the top. It's good stuff. All right, that's it. We're gonna put a lid on it. Just let it simmer. Everything in there is 85 to 90% cooked. So you just need to make sure that your carrots and the kale have kind of softened up. Everything else should be totally done, but just let it come to a nice simmer. Check it out, and then we're gonna add a ton of salt and maybe pepper and maybe a little splash of vinegar if we need a little more acid, but it's a very basic soup. So we'll come back in maybe 30 minutes. So our soup has been cooking medium-high heat. I need to check for doneness now. The most dense thing that I have in here would be the carrots. So I'm pulling out a carrot, and I need to make sure that I can easily go through it with a fork, which I can. And that, I think, is the most hardest thing in here. So if that is done, then you know everything else is done. You can just check a couple other ones. They pierced nicely. So now we need to season it. Depending on what kind of broth you use, you might need less salt than what I'm gonna use. Since I know I made the broth and there is no salt in it, I need a lot of salt. I really have no idea how much, but a lot. Most of this thing, and this is a diamond kosher salt. It's a lot lighter than table salt. So when in doubt, maybe don't do a ton. Start out with a little bit, and I'm really only seasoning this with salt, pepper, and then at the end, I think I might put a little bit of white wine vinegar in there. I think that brightness would really complement the chorizo. I'm gonna do a little more pepper. I was talking at the same time. Chorizo has that kind of tanginess anyway, so I think it'd be really nice in the soup. And when you're sick, not that you're always sick eating this, but that little bit of tang I think is good for the taste buds. I have just some kind of little vessel. I know I don't need to taste any of the actual vegetables, it's just the broth. So I'll just put a little bit in there, swirl around because it's boiling hot. But when you have just a little bit, it cools off quickly. Not bad. Maybe just a tinge more salt. I can't taste any pepper in there. You could use ground already, probably make life easier. I think just a little bit more salt, maybe that much. And then for vinegar, I'm thinking just a few splashes. I don't want a vinegary soup. Maybe a tablespoon, tablespoon, tablespoon. So maybe 3-ish tablespoons. That was just a guess. Give it a good swirl around because you have to make sure your salt is dissolved. If you were using a really coarse salt, it's not going to be dissolved. So if I taste it right now, that's really not a true indication of the salt level. So that's why I love Diamond Kosher. It just melts instantly. We're mixing it all around. The other thing I like to do, I do see the bay leaves in here. I don't take them out. I leave them in. People know not to eat them. And I don't know, in my family anyways, if you get the bay leaf, you get to make a wish. Who doesn't need more wishes in their life? All right, round 2. Broth only. Vegetables. Again, give it a good little swirl. Perfecto. It's delicious. If you like a little more acid, you could put that in there. You could do lemon juice. Other things you could do, you could add plain chicken to this if you want it a little bit more high protein. If you don't like garbanzo beans, use a different bean or use like diced potatoes. I just don't like to use potatoes because I like to freeze a lot of this. So it's pretty versatile. It's your standard kind of Portuguese soup with a little bit of twist because it's super healthy for you. Thank you for joining me at Go Beyond Betty, where you are taking whisks in the kitchen. Look at you making a whole thing of soup, nothing measured. You figured it out. Great job. We'll see you next time. Bye.